If cooking to temperature was all it took, nobody would ever ruin brisket, ribs, or pork shoulder. But proven pitmasters know that's not how great barbecue actually works. Tonight, I'm breaking down why cooking to temp isn't enough and what experienced pitmasters are watching instead so they can get consistent results. Greetings, my name's Kenyatta Robinson. This is the Backyard Smokemaster Barbecue Podcast. I welcome all of you who are tuning in live. Don't be shy, jump into the comments. You can ask questions about the topic at hand, whatever it is we're talking about, or anything that's on your mind related to barbecue. It's all fair game. All comments, questions, barbecue related are definitely welcome. And as I say every week, it's really the comments from you guys, the folks that are watching and tuning in live, that is the engine that drives this show. All right, so let's get into this. Let me just start off by asking you guys some questions, and feel free to pop your answer into the comment. What meat do you cook to temperature and still get inconsistent results? When you cook brisket, are you checking the flat, the point, or both? How are you resting your meat? Uncovered, tented, or held? And what thermometer are you using? Where are you placing it? So let's get into the problem and why it happens. And actually, before we get into that, I'm going to start off. We already got some comments. So let me get these going. Get this positioned a little better. Always amazes me how every time I start off this show, there's always a little chink in the armor, but here we go. Okay, so the Real Meat Stick says, to answer tonight's pinned question, brisket by a mile. You can pull 2 briskets at 203 degrees and get one buttery and perfect and one tight and dry. And then we got E Nice of NYC. He says, turkey breast. Okay. And then Real Meat Stick also says, wild game, venison, elk, etc. Temperature control doesn't save you here. Why? Because extremely lean muscle fiber density varies by animal and there's no margin for error. All right. Let's get back to this. Okay, so see, I think I got a little bit ahead of myself. Okay, so again, the problem and why it happened. So the problem essentially is when you're relying strictly on your thermometer, you have to remember that temperature is a data point. It's not a guarantee. And cooking to temp can still produce, as we've already seen in the comments, it can still produce tough brisket at 203 degrees, dry turkey at 165, mushy ribs that hit the so-called right number. Real Meat Stick says, temperature tells you when to start checking, not when to stop cooking. And you know that in a nutshell, and let me get that up on the screen. That in a nutshell is essentially, I think, going to be one of the main reoccurring themes that we're going to hit all night. He just said it very succinctly right there. Temperature tells you when to start checking, but not when to stop cooking. And this is why you cook to feel and not to a number. Exactly right. I couldn't agree more. Okay, so we've hit some of the problems that you're going to run into when you're strictly relying on temperature. Why it happens. Meat is not uniform. Depending on what you're cooking, there can be variations in terms of the size, the fat, the quantity of fat in whatever it is you're cooking, the quality of the meat that you're cooking can play a role. There's just all types of different variances that can impact, you know, what you're cooking and what information, what feedback you're truly getting when you're looking at that thermometer. So heat also isn't uniform. There are different hot spots inside of your grill or smoker, the airflow. We all know, the ambient temperature can vary in different locations inside of your cooker. Probes lie. They are not foolproof. There are differences in readings or inaccuracies can occur based on, where you place the probe. Is the probe touching fat, or is the probe touching bone? Or maybe the temperature probe is giving you a surface reading as opposed to a temperature reading inside of the thickest part of the meat. Time and rest are often ignored. So a lot of times we as pitmasters, you may forget that carryover cooking and moisture redistribution is also going to play a role. So numbers don't cook meat, heat, time, and structure do. All right, let's talk about 5 proven things that pitmasters should be tracking beyond the final temperature. I'm calling this the Pitmaster dashboard. So number 1, where the temperature is measured. And again, here we're talking about potential cases where we have probe placement pitfalls. So for example, with the brisket, you can get, and you definitely will get, different temperature readings depending on whether or not you're probing the flat versus the point. In ribs, are you probing between the bones instead of the actual meat? I've seen videos, and there's probably a video out there of me doing this incorrectly too, where you're taking the probe and inserting it in between the bones instead of the actual meat. I mean, maybe you do that to get a good, feel for the tenderness, but if you're actually looking for a good temperature reading, it's better to probe the actual meat, like we see in this picture right here. And then with regard to chicken, are you probing the thickest part of the meat of the chicken and avoiding bone? So a perfect temperature in the wrong spot is still the wrong answer. It is not foolproof and not what you should be relying on. So temperature, the placement of the probe is very important. Number 2 on the Pitmaster dashboard, you have to be cognizant of the rate of the rise. So in other words, how fast is the temperature climbing? A fast climb often means that your meat is drying out. The risk of drying the meat increases if the temperature is rising too fast. A slow climb can be fine, but of course that can also affect your timeline. Given the two, I would much rather have a slow climb than a climb that is excessively fast. So again, if it's climbing too fast, you're cooking the outside faster than the inside can actually keep up, and that can also be problematic. Okay, we got a comment here. Sometimes, why my comments are coming in not really shaped well. I can tell this is going to be a theme all night. So bear with me as I fix up these comments as I pull them up. Okay. Sometimes my instant read thermometer picks up warmer temperatures in the center and cooler temperatures closer to the outside. In this situation, does food safety say to use the lowest reading? Well, I would say that I would say that for accuracy's sake, you really should be going by what the probe is giving you closer to the center, or what you always hear folks say is, probe the thickest part of the meat, because that's the part that's going to take the longest to cook. And for food safety purposes, you want that temperature reading to be closer to your, that's the one that you should be going by. But yeah, I guess in particular with regard to your question, where you're saying, does food safety say to use the lowest reading? I mean, that's probably the safer approach, because obviously you don't want to serve food that is undercooked, under temperature, than over. But again, the best rule of thumb is to place that probe in the thickest part of the meat, aim for the center, make sure it's inserted far enough in order to get a more accurate reading of what's happening. So that would be the response to that. Okay, so number 3 on the Pitmaster dashboard. So what we really need to be thinking about and cognizant of recognizing are our texture signals. In other words, how does the probe feel when you insert it into the meat, and what kind of resistance are you picking up? So we've all heard this saying over and over again, when you insert the probe, you want it to go in like warm butter, like there's with little to no resistance. If you're doing a brisket, test multiple spots in the flat. And then you might ask, well, why not the point? The point has more fat content in it, and it's more likely that the point is going to give you hotter temperature readings. It's going to be cooking faster than the flat. This is something that I actually really became aware of recently as I was doing briskets. And it makes sense when you really think about it, because more than likely when you're inserting the probe into the point, it's more likely that you could actually be getting some of that fat content, getting a fat content reading, which is going to cook faster than meat. So food safety purposes or for accuracy's sake, it's really more about, what type of readings are you getting in the flat? Real Meat Stick says, that's an interesting question. In this case, it sounds like the meat is cooking inside to outside. I think this is in relation to that last question that we got. And he says, I would check the calibration of the entire temperature probe in boiling water to get an even 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius. So yeah, that's also a good exercise to do when you do get a new thermometer, is to, do a calibration and make sure that in boiling water, you're getting a 212 reading, or you can do the ice water test and make sure that when you insert the probe, you're getting a frozen temperature reading, which is what? That's 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 Celsius, right? correct me in the comments if I've got those numbers wrong, but I think that's right. Okay, next, with regard to the texture signals that we should be looking for. So with regard to ribs, instead of actually relying and going off of the temperature reading that you're getting from the probe, Pitmasters have found that you're going to be better off by running a bend test. Do the bend test on your ribs. That's actually going to matter more than chasing a number. So like in this picture, you see he's holding up the ribs and you want to see them begin to kind of fold over. And when they begin to look like they're going to break apart, then you definitely know that those ribs are done and they are tender enough. Thank you, Real Meat Stick, for confirming my math on the spot there. Yes, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius is correct if you do a probe test by running it in ice water or like a ice bath type of test. Thank you for confirming that. Okay, so we are rolling along. If you're getting value from this episode, please do me a favor. Take a moment to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and share this show. And keep the comments coming. That definitely helps us in the YouTube algorithm. Now back to the Pitmaster dashboard. Number 4, rendering and fat behavior. So let's talk about some things that Pitmasters look for visually. We want the fat cap to be rendered as opposed to rubbery. We want the bark to set, which basically means if you take your finger and you touch the bark, does it smear? You know, is it looking kind of wet and damp and smear coming off on your fingertips when touched? And are the juices thin and watery, or are they richer looking? So we're going to take a deep dive and look and talk about what the juices tell you. But Real Meat Stick says the meat on pork ribs should pull from the bone, not fall off the bones. This is a great point. We know, or maybe you don't know, but the common thought here is if, you know, the meat is falling off the bones, and we hear a lot of people that eat ribs say, that's what I want. I want my ribs to be fall off the bone tender. That really means that they're overcooked. So Real Meat Stick, I agree with him completely. The meat on pork ribs should pull from the bone, not fall off the bones. Whereas with beef ribs, it's about the bone falling out or easily pulling out. Yeah, that's always a good sign too. When you do your beef ribs, I like to do the plate beef ribs. You slice them, and I love when that big beef bone, you know, just slides right out. Then you really know that you've nailed it then. Okay, the color and consistency of the fat are indicators of fat render. Is the fat yellow or white? Ooh. I know I've seen where the fat, you know, sometimes you see it yellow. I don't know the answer to this. So Real Meat Stick, let us know. What should we be looking for? Should it be yellow or should it be white? I think it probably should be more of a yellow look than white looking. So I'm gonna, you know, take a risk and put myself out there. That's my guess. So let us know what the answer is on that one. Okay, let's see. Let's get back into the Pitmaster dashboard. Okay, so we're just talking about, again, with this point about rendering and fat behavior, juices thin and watery versus richer looking. So we're going to do a deeper dive looking and talking about the juices. So early in the cook, it's normal for juices to look thin, watery, and pale. So when this is happening, the water is being driven out of the meat, and the fat and the collagen haven't fully melted yet. So the key point here is that watery juices early in the cook don't mean failure. They mean that the cook isn't finished yet. Now, later in the cook, you want to see juices that look richer, slightly thicker, more opaque or glossy. So what's happening at this stage is that the fat is rendering, the collagen is breaking down, flavors are concentrating. So rich looking juices tell me that the fat is finally joining the party. All right, let me get back into some of these comments here. Okay, Society Brother Jeff says, get this, work on that comment there. Okay. He says, especially on brisket, that yellow caramel looking rendered fat cap is amazing. Yeah. Mike, Society Brother Mike says, what is it called when the taste like candy? What is it called when it tastes like candy? Okay, you got me stumped there. When it tastes like candy, I almost feel like this is a riddle. But help me out. Like, are we talking about a specific meat when you say tastes like candy? 'Cause right now, it's not really hitting me. Real Meat Stick confirms that the fat should have a yellow tinge from the smoke. Yeah. In fact, when a proper trim of the fat is done, the smoke color and flavor should penetrate. Okay, Mike, I think he's saying with the candy comment, the fat on a brisket. Okay. I haven't really heard that saying. So I don't know if you guys in the comments, or if you guys are familiar um, with regard to brisket, what is it called when it tastes like okay, or maybe you're talking about burnt ends. Is that what you mean? So burnt ends is where you basically take the meat from the point, you cube it up, and this is after the brisket has already cooked. So this is kind of like a second cook. You cube up the meat from the point or the fatty, and then you dredge it in like barbecue sauce. You might add some brown sugar to it and put it back on the smoker for maybe an hour and a half, and that'll give it. Maybe that's what we're talking about. So we're talking about brisket burnt ends. I think that's maybe that's what you're referring to, Mike, and that is also fantastic way to enjoy and get even more, happiness, make folks happy with your brisket. Because again, the meat coming off of the point, those are those nice, especially if you do cube it up, super fluffy, super tender if you've done it right. And yeah, if you turn them into burnt ends, then that is definitely more like candy. Let's see. I think, and then going on about the penetration of the smoke into the meat, and that's what creates the smoke ring that we all chase after. And then Real Meat Stick says rendered intramuscular fat is that candy flavor. Okay, so I don't know. Maybe that's what you're referring to as well. Um, let's see. Okay, here's another question. Is brisket a counter example to the rule of thumb? Okay. It says to use the temperature at the thickest part of the meat, but the thicker point cooks faster, so we go by the thinner flat. So there's always going to be some exceptions to the rule. So, like I mentioned earlier, the point, even though the point is definitely thicker, again, remember the point has a lot more fat content than the flat. So that's why we're gonna get higher and faster, where it looks like the point is cooking faster because all of that fat in there is cooking faster than, the meat, which is, the point is gonna have more like just those thin striations of fat versus, chunks and globs of fat that can be found inside of the point. So, yeah, I guess if you want to look at it that way, that would be one of the exceptions. So, again, when we're doing a brisket, more important in terms of figuring out whether or not your brisket is done, to be checking the internal temperatures of the point and going off of that as opposed to I'm getting the internal temperatures off of the flat as opposed to going off of the internal temperatures of the point for that reason. And the more that we talk about it and you guys have got me thinking about it, I see why Pitmasters, for instance, like Meathead, when he was on the show, I think he would advocate for separating the point and the flat, cooking them separately because they're always going to cook at different rates of speed. And, that'll kind of eliminate the temptation of pulling the whole brisket off of the smoker just because you see those temperatures of the point, just knowing that the point is going to cook faster. Yeah. Real Meat Stick says, when cooked low and slow, it renders slowly, mixes with gelatinized collagen meat juices, the Maillard reaction compounds. The result is that sweet, buttery, almost caramelized flavor. Okay, so Real Meat Stick really knows the science. So maybe that's probably getting to the crux and the heart of the answer to Mike's question. When the fat is giving you that sweet, buttery, caramelized flavor. Oof, it's making me hungry. Okay. So getting back into the juices deep dive. So again, what's happening here is, again, fat is rendering. This is when the juices are more thick and rich. The collagen is breaking down and the flavors are concentrating. So rich looking juices tell me that the fat is finally joining the party. Okay, now why does all of this matter for texture? So if juices stay thin and watery near your target temperature, the fat may still be rubbery. The meat can feel tough or dry even though you're at the quote unquote right number. And when the juices look richer, the fat has melted, the meat, it feels better in the mouth, it feels more tender and cohesive. Let's look at this from the perspective of specific cuts of meat. So with regard to brisket, richer juices are a strong positive sign late in the cook. For pork shoulder, rich juices often show up earlier because of higher fat content. Ribs, the juice appearance matters less than bend and resistance. And for poultry, juices should run clear, not cloudy. And this is more about food safety, not richness. So, again, the juice appearance is a supporting signal, but ultimately, it's not the decision maker. Okay, back to the dashboard. So, number 5 on the dashboard is rest and carryover strategy. So, carryover can push meat past the perfect temperature. So, that's important to keep in mind. So, in other words, if you're trying to take something to 203, know that you can pull it maybe at 198, 199. The carryover cooking during the rest is going to take it the rest of the way. Also, very important, and we see this much too often. You've spent all that time cooking low and slow and bringing your meat, getting it up to temperature, and then you're not patient. Slicing too soon can make that meat drier or tougher. So, allowing it to rest properly for a good, adequate amount of time is very, very important. You don't want to ruin your cook by slicing too soon. So remember, the cook temperature gets you close, but it will reach the goal temperature while the meat is resting. All right, guys, if you enjoy this type of community that we have here in the podcast, where we've got folks in the comments asking and answering questions and giving us tips and tidbits, and clearly this audience likes to go deep into understanding what is happening, while we are cooking. This is the type of thing that we do all the time inside of the Backyard Smokemasters Society. Take a moment, it'll take you less than a minute. Scan that QR code or go to backyardsmokemaster.com/society and get into our barbecue community. We keep the conversation going all week long. We've got Society brothers Mike and Jeff and correctional officer for lockdown right here, right now. And you can chat it up with those guys all week long inside of the society. All right, now let's talk about some different scenarios, some common failure scenarios that can happen even though you cook the meat to your desired temperature. So these are common failure situations. Let's start with brisket. So your brisket has hit 203 degrees, but it's tough. So some of the likely causes for this, it's not probe tender, which basically means, again, like we talked about, when you insert the probe, not even worrying about what the temperature reading is on the probe. Does the probe go in like butter? Are you getting resistance when you stick that probe into the thickest part of the meat? And brisket, we're talking about in the flat. We're going to check different points or different areas in the flat. Is it going in tender? Pretty sure at 203, it's going to go into the point like butter, because again, there's a lot of fat content, no problem there. The thing that you should really be concerned about is what type of resistance are you getting when you probe the flat. Maybe you're reading the probe temperature in the point where the flat temperature is lagging. So that's why we want to check different spots on the flat. And maybe the fat is under rendered, or it got too hot early in the cook. So these are some potential causes. And again, as I just mentioned, some of the fixes are Test multiple spots in the flat. Keep cooking in small time increments until it does feel like it is probe tender. And then, if necessary, protect the edges if they appear to be drying out. So, I always like to wrap my briskets in butcher paper. Another good method, and I've done this, it works well, is to use the foil boat method as well. Okay, another scenario. Your pork shoulder hit 203 degrees, but it won't pull clean. Or when you try and pull that shoulder blade, it's not coming out nice, smooth, and easy. That's always a pitmaster pride point when that shoulder blade, comes out real easy after you've gotten it to 203 and you've let it rest. Some likely causes: there wasn't enough time for the collagen to melt down, or the exterior dried out before the interior finished cooking. Some fixes: again, we're relying on, how some of those feel indicators. So rely on the bone wiggle and the probe feel. Extend the cook or hold it longer before you begin to shred the pork shoulder. Another scenario: your turkey hit 165 and it's dry. Some of the causes: the breast overshot the temperature while the dark meat wasn't ready, or you didn't allow it to rest properly. Things you can do: use separate temperature targets for the breast and thighs. It's okay for the thighs to go 175, 180. Really don't want to see the breast go over 165 because it's likely going to give you some really dry turkey meat. Another thing you can do is, kind of back to that separating segments of meat we talked about with the brisket, maybe separating the flat from the point. Maybe you want to separate the breast from the thighs. If you can, pull the breast earlier when possible and then let it rest properly. Let's talk about those ribs, those baby back and spare ribs. They hit the number that you're looking for, but the texture is wrong. Some of the culprits: the ribs, remember, are a poor candidate for cooking to temp because temperature readings on ribs are pretty inconsistent. Another big culprit, kind of getting into that, fall off the bone ribs. The ribs may have become oversteamed if you wrap them in foil. The fix, again, like we talked about, instead of relying on the temperature reading, rely on the bend test or the toothpick test. When you stick the toothpick test into the meat, you want to see it go in with very little resistance. It should go in nice and easy. Let's see. And then also make sure that you manage your wrap time and moisture. Okay, getting back to the brisket, I see that I missed a few comments here. Let me get back to this. Real Meat Stick said, hold on. So another suggestion from Real Meat Stick: when it comes to brisket, this is where brisket rotation comes into play, depending on the style of cooker you're using and the direction of your heat. Yeah, so in other words, if you do find maybe a segment of the brisket is cooking and rising in temperature much, much faster, maybe the point is really going up a lot faster, cooking, getting closer to finished than the flat, or, one side of the brisket is considerably hotter than the other side, then yeah, another thing you can do is to rotate the brisket, get the side that is cooking slowest, and have it facing your temperature source. Maybe if it's an offset smoker, maybe you kind of rotate it around to the side that's closer to the firebox. But yeah, like you said, depending on the style of cooker you're using and the direction that the heat is coming from. Let's see. Correctional officer says, I can only imagine what I'm missing. Real meat stick is teaching too. I hate being late for class. Well, that's okay. You can always catch the replay. You can start it from the very beginning and make sure you don't miss a thing. Real Meat Stick says you may have cooked it too quick. That's why it's tough. Low and slow on that brisket is the key to tenderness. I like this point. I know there are some who believe in doing briskets hot and fast. I think Myron Mixon, one of his claims to fame, right, at least for competition cooking, is being able to cook a brisket hot and fast. I mean, that might be okay for, the pitmaster champion type, like a Myron Mixon. But I think for us backyard guys, I think the safer route is definitely to go low and slow with your brisket. You take out a lot of the risk components that you can end up encountering if you try to go hot and fast. So that's just my own opinion, kind of in lockstep with Real Meat Stick, who says, or maybe you should check with a different thermometer to verify the temps. Okay, and then with pork, yeah, it's about turning collagen into gelatin. All right. So again, before you pull, well, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. So next we're going to talk about what I'm calling the 4-check rule. And I actually have a checklist with these 4 points that you can obtain. Just go to backyardsmokemaster.com/4-check. And if you look at the message that's scrolling at the bottom of the screen, you will see that address right there. So these are 4 things to remember to check as a pitmaster. So before you pull any meat, number 1, confirm that you are utilizing the correct probe location. Number 2, be cognizant that the rate of rise, the rate that your meat is cooking, is reasonable. And if it seems to be unreasonable, like Meat Stick said, there are some things you can do to, try and correct it, alleviate it. Number 3, we're checking for texture. Texture check is the tenderness test. So like we've talked about, things like probing for ribs, probing the meat and not, just probing in between the bones, doing the bend test on ribs. So we're looking to check texture, and often overlooked but super critical, your rest plan. Make sure you have a rest plan and then stick to it, follow it. Don't resist the temptation, to start slicing into that meat prematurely. So how long did it rest? How long did you hold the meat before cutting into it? Again, temperature tells me where I am. but texture is actually telling me if it is done. So again, go to backyardsmokemaster.com/4-check, and I will send that to you guys. And that is also an address that you can use to get into the Backyard Smokemaster Society. So let me plug the society one more time. If you want help diagnosing your cooks, join the Backyard Smokemaster Society. Post your cook notes, your photos, and temps, and we'll break down what happened and what to do differently next time. Or if you nailed it, receive the love from the society and take your victory lap. Correctional officer says, society, family, and friends, have a great remainder of the week and stay warm. Chicago is expected to be with a high of 0 degrees with wind chills of -30 on Friday. Yikes. Oh my goodness. All right. Okay, guys. So, again, as we've said over and over, cooking to temp gets you started, but thinking like a proven pitmaster is what gets you consistent results. So we're going to be taking a break next week, but we'll be back on February 4th with a show that's going to be about fire management, how to hold steady temperatures without chasing numbers. So thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you all hanging out with me for a little bit. This is my favorite hour of the week. I'm your host, Kenyatta Robinson. Get out there and enjoy your grills and smokers, and I will see you next time.